Vienna, 1907. Just as the chandeliers of Schönbrunn Palace caught firelight from the 100 candles lit for the Archduke's winter masquerade, the Duchess wore a gown of deep emerald silk, its train whispering secrets across the marble floor. Her gloved hand rested lightly on the arm of a minor cousin of the Habsburg line, but her eyes sharp beneath her lace mask were not on him. They followed the footman. Not just any footman. The tall one. The one with the quiet eyes and the scar along his left jaw, just visible when he turned toward the light. He moved like a soldier, not a servant. Too still, too watchful. He stood by the east threshold, silver tray in hand, expression blank. "Duchess," the cousin drawled. "May I claim your first waltz?" "No," she said simply, not turning her gaze. "I'm not dancing tonight." The cousin blinked. "But..." She walked away before he could finish. Her name was Berrina Delacroix, 26. Widow of the Duke of Carinthia, who died of influenza 2 winters ago. She'd worn mourning black for a year, then navy for another. This was her first public appearance in color. The court noticed. But Berrina had noticed something before them. The footman. He was not part of the regular palace staff. She knew their names, their rhythms. She had lived at court since 17. This was a new face. She waited until a waltz began and the guests surged toward the ballroom's center, leaving the periphery clear. Then she walked straight to him. "You're not Austrian," she said softly. He didn't answer. Didn't look at her. "Your boots are polished like an officer's," she went on. "But your gloves are too short for court protocol. And your posture isn't that of a servant. Who placed you here?" He met her eyes finally. They were amber. Warm, alert. "I'm filling in for a sick man," he said. "That's all." "You're lying," she said and smiled. "But well." He glanced around. "You shouldn't be speaking to me." "And yet," she said, setting her fingertips on the edge of his tray. "I am." He didn't smile, but something shifted in his stance. "You're forward for a duchess. I was married at 19 to a man thrice my age. I've earned the right to be forward." "You've earned danger," he said quietly. She tilted her head. "What's your name?" "Quinlan," he said after a pause. "Quinlan Gray." She stepped closer, the scent of orange blossom and snow in her wake. "Are you armed, Quinlan Gray?" He didn't answer. She leaned in. "Because I have a duel at dawn, and I need a second." His eyes darkened. "What?" She pulled a folded note from her glove and tucked it beneath the edge of his tray. "Meet me at the stables. 5 o'clock. Don't wear livery." Then she turned and vanished into the crowd. The stables behind Schönbrunn were silent and thick with frost. Horses shifted in their stalls, tails flicking in sleep. Berrina stood by a gray gelding, dressed in a man's coat and riding boots, her hair braided beneath a fur cap. She held 2 rapiers in a leather case. Quinlan approached in a wool coat and plain trousers, no livery in sight. His eyes flicked to the weapons. "You weren't joking." "No," she said. "My cousin challenged me. Over an inheritance. He didn't expect me to accept. But I did." "You're not planning to kill him." "I'm planning to make him bleed," she said. "Enough to shame him." Quinlan exhaled. "You need more than a second. You need training." "I need someone who hates the nobility enough to help a duchess make a fool of one," she said, handing him a rapier. "Do you qualify?" He took the blade. "I qualify." She smiled sharp, private. Then lunged at him. He parried without thinking. Steel whispered through air. Their blades danced. She was fast, unrefined, full of fury. He corrected her stance with a touch to her elbow. She jerked at the contact. "You've done this before," she said, breathless. "Infantry captain. Transylvania. For years. Why are you here?" "I fell out of favor," he said shortly. "With the army?" "With the empire." She didn't ask more. Instead, she attacked again. He blocked, spun, caught her wrist and held it. "You lead with emotion," he said. "That'll get you killed." "I don't want to win," she said. "I want to humiliate him." He let go of her wrist. "Then start by standing like you don't care." She adjusted her stance. He nodded. "Better." They practiced until the sky began to pink at the edges. When she left for the dueling field on the palace's south lawn, She felt her arms aching but steady. Quinlan stood at her side as her second, coat buttoned to the throat, silent as the wind. The duel was quick. Her cousin was slow, unprepared. She disarmed him in 3 passes and nicked his shoulder with a flourish that made the onlookers gasp. Blood bloomed neatly on his white shirt. Gasps turned to laughter. Her cousin turned red and stormed off. The matter was over. But Quinlan didn't leave. That night, she found a note tucked beneath her tea tray. It read, "You fight like a storm. I'll be in the conservatory at midnight. If you want to learn more." She went. The conservatory was dim and full of orchids. He stood near the fountain, sleeves rolled, eyes wary. "You shouldn't have written," she said. "You shouldn't have come." She stepped closer, brushed her gloved hand against his bare forearm. "You're not what you seem," she said. "Neither are you." Their breath mingled in the warm air. "I need a secret tutor," she whispered. "In swordplay strategy. Survival. You're the only man I trust." "And if I say no?" "You won't," she said. "Because you watched me all night. And I saw your hands shake when I bled him." He looked away. "I've never seen a duchess bleed a noble," he said. "It made me want to stay." "So stay," she said. He did. By the 3rd lesson they spoke in whispers. By the 5th he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. By the 7th she kissed him. And not once did they speak of love. Not then. But they both knew it had begun. By February, the snows in Vienna lingered in brittle crusts along the palace eaves, and the river froze in slow sheets that reflected the gray sky like dull metal. Berrina now met Quinlan twice each week, never at the same hour, never in the same place. A forgotten corridor behind the music rooms. A disused hunting lodge on the edge of the grounds. The cellar where old uniforms were stored. They spoke little while training, but when blades were sheathed, words came with a quiet urgency neither fully understood. One evening she led him to a narrow library on the 3rd floor, one he hadn't known existed. The scent of leather bindings and applewood smoke clung to the air, and the only light came from a candelabra she'd lit herself. She wore a gown of dull plum, her shoulders bare beneath a shawl of pale fur. She poured them each a measure of kirsch and handed him a glass. "I had a letter from my solicitor," she said, sitting near the hearth without waiting for him to join her. "My husband's estate is being contested again. A cousin from Trieste is claiming I married under duress." Quinlan sat across from her, glass untouched. "Can they prove that?" "No," she said. "But they don't need to. They need noise. Enough to make me retreat." He studied her. "Will you?" "I didn't bleed a man in the snow to step back into silence." She sipped. "But they're gathering allies. A cardinal. 2 barons. They think me alone." "You aren't," he said, and this time his voice didn't hesitate. She looked up. "Why do you stay?" He set his glass down. "Because I've seen what you are when no one's watching." "And what is that?" "Someone who's never belonged to anyone, but never stopped trying to choose her own name." She stood slowly, crossed to the window. Her reflection hovered beside the frost. "I was born in Provence. My mother was Spanish. My father gambled our lands away before I could walk. I was sent to Austria at 16 to be displayed like a tapestry. I never chose my name. You're choosing it now." She turned, her face shadowed by the candlelight. "If you're caught near me, they'll take you apart piece by piece. You've no title. No protection." He rose. "I was a soldier. I know what it costs to stand near a storm." Their eyes held. Then she whispered, "Teach me how to disarm a man while seated." He blinked once. "Now." "Yes." Without standing. Without drawing attention. He reached for the small blade sheathed at his side and knelt beside her chair. "Grip it like this. Thumb here. The rest of your fingers light. If he lunges, angle your elbow no more than a flick." She followed his hand, her brow knit in concentration. "And if he grabs me?" He took her wrist gently, adjusted her angle. "Then you twist here. Fast. The blade won't need to pierce, just cut enough to send a message." She tried. It wasn't elegant, but her movement held purpose. "Again," he said. They practiced until her palm bore faint red lines from the hilt. When she finally looked at him, her gaze had shifted, less guarded, more deliberate. "You told me you fell out of favor," she said. "What did you do?" I refused to carry out an order, he said. There was a village near the Russian border. The general wanted it razed. I refused. Did they court-martial you? No. They marked me as unstable. I was discharged quietly. My uniform was burned. She reached for his hand. They burned the wrong thing. He didn't speak. Just closed his fingers around hers. A gust of wind rattled the window panes and she didn't flinch. I'm leaving the palace in March, she said. To visit a cousin near Salzburg. That's the story anyway. His brow furrowed. And the truth? I'm going to meet with a banker who can free the last of my inheritance. If I succeed, I won't need the emperor's favor. Or the court's approval. And if you fail? I'll return and pretend none of this happened. He studied her face. I could go with you. You'd be recognized. Only if I wear the wrong coat. She laughed softly, the sound like silk brushing stone. You'd do that. I already have. She traced the edge of her glass with a fingertip. If I asked you to leave this place, to vanish into a life with no titles, no protection, and no certainty, what would you say? I'd ask where we're going. She looked at him fully then, her voice steady. We're going wherever we aren't watched. He nodded. Then I'll need a better knife. She smiled, an expression that didn't beg or perform, but simply existed, real and quiet and free. He kissed her then. Once. No urgency, no pretense. When they parted, she whispered. I've never danced for anyone. He touched her cheek. Then teach me the steps. They stood, hands clasped, and moved slowly in the narrow space between shelves. No music. No audience. Just two people learning how to move in rhythm with a world that had never once made space for them. Outside, the wind softened. The sky above Salzburg carried the color of damp parchment, and the wind that rolled down from the mountains tasted faintly of copper and pine. Berrina adjusted her veil as the carriage wheels jostled over the last stretch of gravel road. The manor house rising ahead through a veil of morning mist. It had once belonged to a minor branch of the Esterhazy family, but was now let out, seasonally quiet, unfashionable, and precisely what she needed. Quinlan rode ahead on a borrowed mare, his coat collar turned up, his jaw unshaven. He had taken to wearing a soft cap pulled low, and he rarely dismounted near towns. 3 days of travel had made him quieter than usual, but not withdrawn. Instead, he watched everything the way a soldier watches an uncertain horizon. Inside, the manor was cold. The steward, a silent man with a limp, led them through rooms veiled in dust sheets and opened only the west wing. Berrina unpacked her papers, ledgers, and 2 crate-bound portraits in the drawing room. Quinlan took the attic room without complaint and installed himself near the back door for the first 2 nights, sleeping lightly, rising early. On the 3rd morning, she found him in the neglected conservatory, sleeves rolled, pruning dead vines from a trellis with a borrowed penknife. You should be resting, she said softly, brushing a leaf from her shoulder. I don't sleep well in strange houses. You've been sleeping in strange places for months now. He looked up. This one feels different. She knelt beside the neglected potting bench and began brushing dust from a set of clay planters. Different how? Quieter, he said. Not empty but waiting. She didn't answer. Instead, she uncovered a pot of dried lavender, its stalks brittle but still fragrant. She set it between them. I met the banker yesterday, she said after a long moment. He'll unlock the account. But there's a condition. Quinlan straightened. What kind? He wants me to remain in Austria. Within reach. He says it's for verification. But he means leverage. Will you agree to it? I already did, she said. For now. I'll find another way once the funds clear. He nodded once. How long? A week. Maybe 2. He pulled his sleeves down, wiped his hands on his trousers. What will you do with it once it's yours? She leaned against the bench. Buy land. Not in Vienna. Somewhere quiet. With a vineyard or a mill. Something no one can confiscate. And after that? That depends. On whether or not you're still with me. He looked at her, not startled but openly. You don't ask lightly, he said. No, she said. And I don't ask often. He was quiet, then stepped closer, brushing soil from her sleeve with the back of his knuckles. I'm not used to being offered a place without having to earn it. You've already earned it, she said. You just don't see it yet. That night, she left the door between their rooms unlatched. He crossed the threshold after midnight, barefoot and quiet, and lay beside her without a word. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. His breath warmed the hollow of her throat, and her hand lay still over the scar on his jaw. In the morning, she rose first, dressed in silence, and left a folded note on the table. A list of nearby estates for sale. At the bottom, she had written one sentence in careful ink. Choose the one with the strongest walls. By noon he'd crossed out all but one. A vineyard along the river, tucked into a valley where the fog settled late, and the roads remained unpaved. She said nothing when she saw his mark, only nodded once, and sent a wire to the solicitor. 3 days later, as she stood in the upper gallery of a church in town waiting for the banker to arrive with the final papers, Quinlan joined her, coat damp from rain, a small velvet box in one hand. I've nothing to give you, he said simply. No name worth keeping, no land, no shield. She took the box, opened it. Inside was a ring, plain silver, slightly scuffed, the kind worn by field officers. I don't want a shield, she said. I want a partner. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand steady. Then let me stay. Not as your second. As your equal. She pressed her forehead to his. Only if you dance with me. In the church. No, she said, voice low. At the house. After supper.
No lessons. No corrections.
Just the steps we know. He smiled, then, not prideful, not triumphant, but as if something long buried had finally surfaced. That night she lit the lamps herself, moved the chairs from the drawing room, opened the windows to let in the scent of thawing vines. He held out his hand. She took it. They danced slowly without music, barefoot on old parquet, the wind stirring the curtains, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist in time with her pulse. And when they stopped, she didn't step away. Do you remember, she whispered, when I told you I'd never dance for anyone? He nodded. I lied, she said. This is the first time. He kissed her, and the world outside the window faded. They never returned to Vienna. The vineyard lay low in the valley, where the soil stayed damp beneath the weight of early spring. Its fields stretched in furrowed rows, still bare but already beginning to green. The house itself was stone, modest in scale, with thick shutters and a roof of weathered slate. It had once belonged to a retired surveyor, and the record spoke of no heirs. The attic beams sagged slightly, but the walls held firm. They arrived in late April with 2 trunks, 7 ledgers, and only a single hired hand, a man named Duchess whose hearing had faded with age but whose back remained strong. He slept in the small cottage near the press and tended to the vines without question. Quinlan noticed the way the man walked with a limp in wet weather and began mending the steps to his door without being asked. Berrina spent her mornings in the study, the ledgers unfolded across a long oak table. She'd taught herself to read contracts in Latin and Italian, and now she worked through the vineyard's debts and holdings with the same precision she had once applied to court etiquette. She wore no corset, no powder, no veil. Only wool skirts and soft leather boots, her hair bound in a coil by her own hand. You frown when the numbers don't match, Quinlan said one afternoon, standing in the doorway with a small crate of dry kindling. They never match, she replied. But they will. He watched her mark a column with a charcoal pencil. What will you do once they do? Hire workers. Replace the press. Expand the southern terrace. He leaned against the frame. That sounds like the start of a plan. No, she said. It's the continuation of one. That evening, when the rain came soft against the shutters, he brought down a wooden box from the attic. Inside were remnants from the surveyor's year's maps drawn in sepia ink, a compass with a cracked glass face, and a book of pressed herbs labeled in careful script. She lifted one of the maps, studied the folds. These trails, she said. They run through the forest behind the house. They lead to the valley ridge, he said. I walked them yesterday. There's an old watchtower buried in ivy. Was it used for hunting? Or defense? Hard to say. But it's ours now. She traced the markings with her thumb. I want to see it. The next morning, she packed a satchel with bread, dried cherries, and a flask of brandy. He carried a blanket and a lantern just in case. The trail was steep in places, but the air was clean and filled with the scent of wet bark and thawing moss. They walked in silence, the rhythm of their footsteps unhurried, companionable. At the ridge, the tower rose like a tooth from the earth, its stones green with lichen. The door hung askew, but the inner stairs held. From the top, the valley spread beneath them, striped with vines and dotted with wild plum trees. She sat with her back to the wall, pulling her gloves off finger by finger. This is the first place I've stood in years that belongs to no one but us. He poured 2 mouthfuls of brandy into tin cups and passed her one. Then we should name it. Places like this don't need names, she said. They remember who comes. He sat beside her. How long do you think we'll stay here? She didn't answer right away. Then, until the walls fall in or we do. He let that settle. Would you ever go back? To Vienna? There's nothing left there for me. And if someone came looking for you? She turned her face to his. Then they'll have to come through you. He didn't smile, but his hand found hers. They won't get far. They stayed until the sky darkened and the fog began to rise. On the walk back, she tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, and neither spoke of what might come. They had learned long ago how to keep the future from making noise. 2 weeks later, Lucas brought news from the village below. A local magistrate had inquired about the new owners of the vineyard. Not by name, only by reputation, a duchess with a foreign accent, a man with a soldier's bearing. Quinlan closed the gate behind Lucas and found her in the cellar, cataloging the empty barrels. He didn't speak until she looked up. There are questions being asked. She wiped her hands on a cloth. Then we'll give them answers. Careful ones. True ones. Just not all at once. He nodded. We might need to sign the land in both our names. She tilted her head. Would that make us safer? It would make us indivisible. She set down the ledger. Then take me to the magistrate. The papers were signed in the village hall, beneath a faded portrait of the emperor. She wore a collarless jacket and a skirt with dust on the hem, and he stood beside her with his hand steady on the inkwell. When the clerk asked their relation, she answered without pause. Husband and wife. The clerk blinked. Since when? Since just now, she said, and held out her hand. Quinlan took it. No oath, no priest, no witnesses beyond the man with the ledger. But something passed between them, wordless, binding, unmistakable. On the ride back, she leaned against his shoulder, and he looked down at her with a quiet protectiveness born not from possession, but from recognition. That night, she danced with him by the fire. No music. No steps. Only her bare feet against the stone floor and the warmth of his fingers at her waist. And when he whispered her name, not as a title, not as a duty, but as a promise, she whispered his back. Neither needed to say the word love. It had already built the house around them.